Sidney Powell, one of the 19 co-defendants in the Trump election case in Fulton County, pleaded guilty. This is just one day before jury selection was set to begin in her trial.
Ooh, the Kraken has the last laugh. That's right. That is former Trump lawyer Sidney Powell, arguably, and this is a really, really steep contest, but perhaps one of the craziest voices inside of the Trump team, and one of the 19, including the former president himself, who were indicted on these criminal charges, these RICO charges for trying to overturn an election in Georgia. She pled guilty. She pled guilty, and you guys, we've been on this show. I've been hosting this show. We talked to you about the first person to plead guilty. A bail bondsman named Scott Hall was the first guy to plead guilty, and we learned it looks good in terms of your sentence and what you're going to have to pay out, what you're gonna have to do, any time you might have to serve if you plead guilty early. So what did Sidney Powell get slapped with? Let's look at it. In her plea deal in Fulton County Superior Court, part of the deal is she has to plead guilty to 6 misdemeanor counts. Just misdemeanor counts. In her plea, Powell agreed to serve 6 years of probation, pay a $6,000 fine, and $2,700 in restitution to the state of Georgia. She also agreed to submit an apology letter to the citizens of Georgia and to testify, ooh, this is the big one, at related court proceedings. Just a little bit of backstory in case you're just waking up from a very long sleep. Congratulations, I'm sorry the world isn't better. But if you didn't know, Sidney Powell is like she looks like a Yeti dressed in Talbots. But anyway, she also was one of Trump's lawyers after his 2020 election loss to Biden. She was charged with racketeering, conspiracy to commit election fraud, conspiracy to commit computer theft, trespassing and invasion of privacy, and conspiracy to defraud the state. She originally pled not guilty and had agreed to a $100,000 bond. Now we're looking at yes, guilty, almost $9,000 in penalties, 6 years probation, and then she has to testify. Mondale, what do you make of this?
It's a great day for everybody except for the people who are part of this racketeering. Here's what happened when people, or what people thought was gonna happen when a couple of these cases were rushed or moved to a speedy trial because the defendants wanted them. Well, Donald Trump and everybody else thought they were gonna see Fannie's, the attorney in charge here, case against them. So these pleading actually cut that out. And you just know that you have someone who pled guilty to these charges, part of this racketeering scheme, saying that they're gonna testify against you. So this is bad news for everybody. Everybody involved with this trial. I think what happens though is, this is exactly what we knew was gonna happen. Like you said, the Kraken is starting to crack. People are gonna tell. This is Trump is the only person living in a mob movie in his mind about what's gonna happen and who's gonna remain faithful to him. I'm not even surprised if everybody does not plea out and just Trump is left standing with all of this weight of racketeering by himself.
Ooh, it's very exciting. And I agree with you, especially given the fact that she has to testify, which is the biggest thing. And here's CNN's Ellie Honig, who explains just why that is so damning to the rest of the defendants.
This is a major breakthrough for prosecutors, potentially a devastating development for Donald Trump, because what's gonna happen now is Sidney Powell is going to testify for prosecutors in Georgia, and presumably she'll also be prepared to testify for Jack Smith in his federal case in Washington, D.C. She's not indicted in that case, but she's listed as a co-conspirator in that case. She's gonna be able to provide insider information that could be really devastating towards Donald Trump.
How can prosecutors now use her?
So you use her to bring your jury into that very room. She will be the guide. She will be the narrator. She will be able to say, I was in this room with Donald Trump, with Rudy Giuliani. Here's what we discussed. Here's who said what. Here's what we knew. And John, really importantly, in order to take this plea and this deal, Sidney Powell is going to have to acknowledge what we did was criminal. It was illegal. It was a crime. And so that's going to lend a lot of credibility, I think, obviously, to prosecutors' assertions that what Donald Trump did was knowingly a crime.
I have to say, Mondale, I am quite surprised that it's Sidney Powell and not some of the other folks whose names have not been in national news, who've not been Fox News regular contributors, spouting the conspiracies of the big lie over and over again. Like yet to hear her utter any kind of word of backtracking from the things that she said. So it is really striking that she's number 2 to go down in this plea deal. And I'm very curious to hear what Honig just outlined there. Like, I want that on tape. And my question is also like, is part of this, you can't go on Fox News, you can't go on Steve Bannon's War Room and say the exact opposite of what you might have said behind closed doors, right? The Jack Smith case, of course, is also a federal case, or is a federal case, and that's not gonna be televised. It's about the January 6th, insurrection, et cetera, et cetera. But I will say, it's such a slap on the wrist that the real value in her plea is exactly that, is the evidence that she can provide against all of these other defendants, all of these other people. Because $6,000 fine, an apology letter to Georgia, 6 probation for misdemeanors. Come on now. Like, if this were anyone else, again, but these white collar criminals, you could only imagine what their deals would look like.
Yeah, I mean, but this is the nature of racketeering. Like, when you're going after the enterprise, those who are not at the top calling shots usually find themselves walking away with something small. We saw this a lot in New York, where ironically, Giuliani actually basically created the racketeering standard across this country when he was going after the mob. We saw a lot of low-level mob members walking away with probation or witness protections in some cases, even after they had done things as horrendous as murder. So I mean, we know what the point is, and the point is all of those other 19 or so people that have charged, or those who are not charged but were named, are also a part of what they want, and what they want is Donald Trump. And I think to get Donald Trump on what they're going to get him on racketeering in Georgia carries a lot of years. I think this is where we find ourselves. I think they call it blind justice, but we know what it is.
I'm just very fast forward to if Donald Trump ever sees any kind of, even if it's like house arrest or probation himself or whatnot, I just love fast forwarding and imagining Sidney Powell trying to raise money to free our president, even though it was her who helped throw him under the bus. I am just curious where the grift goes, and once it gets sort of dammed up in certain ways, how it flows around the obvious, whatever, forsaking your Lord and Savior, as is happening right now. But we'll see. We'll see whether Sidney openly, maybe she's actually nuts. Maybe she's just well, the prophecy of Q says that ... which, and this is my other question, Mondale, and this is the last thing I'm gonna say. If I'm representing Sidney Powell, I feel like pleading insanity is perhaps my best defense. Because it's easy. And if other people, we will see how I'm sure other lawyers of the people that Sidney Powell might be implicating will say Sidney Powell's crazy. Sidney Powell's nuts. Sidney Powell believed, the QAnon conspiracies or whatnot. They all thought she was nuts behind doors. How can they sort of isolate her as someone who was always sort of the weird wild card in the room? Who, however, was in the room time and time and time again. And look what a liability she's become.